My name is Vreth Olan, Senior Conflict Analyst for the Galactic Conclave of 63 Civilizations. I have documented wars between species that breathe ammonia, species that communicate through color shifts, and species that consider death a mild inconvenience. I have seen battle fleets so large they blocked the light of stars. I have reviewed footage of the Karathi purges, the 9-cycle devastation, and the infamous Skeld uprising, which lasted 400 years and ended because both sides simply forgot what they were fighting about. I thought I had seen everything. I was, to put it in terms that even a newly hatched Gorvanite could understand, catastrophically, embarrassingly wrong. This is my official report to the Conclave Council regarding the species designated in our archives as Homo sapiens, colloquially known as humans, formerly known now to every sentient being in the known galaxy as the problem. The report begins, as all great disasters do, with someone saying, "Oh, they seem perfectly harmless." It was Counselor Drevna Al, bless her 6 hearts, who first proposed allowing the humans to participate in the Galactic Proving Games. The Proving Games, for those who have somehow managed to avoid reading 3,000 years of galactic history, are the civilized alternative to war. 2 species have a disagreement about a trade route, a mineral deposit, or, in one memorable case, a very strongly worded insult about someone's third cousin. Instead of destroying entire planets over it, they settle the matter in the arena. Clean, organized, regulated, peaceful, beautiful, really, as a concept. The games had rules, lots of rules. Rules about permitted weapons, rules about armor ratings, rules about acceptable battle formations, rules about rest periods, rules about the humane treatment of defeated opponents. There were 17 volumes of rules. The Conclave spent decades writing those rules. Drevna Al looked at the humans who had only recently been granted associate membership status in the Conclave and said, with the confidence of someone who has never met a human for longer than 4 minutes, "They are small. They are slow. Their technology is primitive by our standards. Allowing them to participate will be a wonderful gesture of inclusion." Reader, I want you to understand something. I was in that meeting. I read the preliminary reports. I saw the data on human physical capabilities. And yes, on paper they looked manageable. Average height, average weight, no natural armor plating, no venom glands, no electromagnetic discharge, no secondary skeletal structure. They sleep for 1/3 of their lives. 1/3. The Vorkai haven't slept in 600,000 years and they consider it a point of pride. I voted in favor of including the humans. I would like to formally, on the record, apologize to everyone. The first match was scheduled between the humans and the Pelhari. Now the Pelhari are a dignified species, 8 limbs, each one capable of bending in 4 directions. Natural exoskeletons rated at grade 7 impact resistance. They have been participating in the Proving Games for 800 years. They have won 63 consecutive matches. Their team captain, Chauvelin, was a decorated veteran of 11 separate arena engagements and had never lost a single one. He was not prepared. Nobody was prepared. The humans arrived at the arena in their team transport, and the first thing our observation team noted was that they were laughing. Not nervous laughter. Not the forced cheerfulness of a species masking terror. They were genuinely, deeply, obnoxiously amused by something one of them had apparently said. Our translator caught fragments, something about a piece of bread falling on the floor and being eaten anyway. They found this hilarious. They were about to walk into a combat arena against Chauvelin's Pelhari team and they were laughing about bread. The human team captain, a woman named Tova Reyes, shook hands with Chauvelin before the match. This is a human greeting ritual involving the clasping of forelimbs. Chauvelin, to his credit, handled it gracefully. What he was not prepared for was what Tova Reyes said to him during the handshake. "Don't worry," she told him. "We've been practicing." She said it like she was reassuring him, like she was doing him a kindness. Chauvelin, veteran of 11 arena engagements, found this unsettling in a way he later described as deeply personally offensive because it implied she thought I needed comfort, which I did not. And then it turned out I very much did. The match began. Here is what the human team did in the first 3 minutes, and I want you to understand that our analysts watched this footage 47 times before we believed it was real and not some kind of transmission error. The Pelhari opened, as they always do with their signature formation, the tidal wall. 8 warriors moving in perfect synchronization, exoskeletons locked together, advancing as a single armored unit. It is statistically one of the most effective opening formations in the Proving Games. It had never been broken in recorded history. The humans looked at the tidal wall for approximately 4 seconds. Then Tova Reyes turned to her team and said, quite cheerfully, "Mako, You know what to do. The human designated Mako, whose full name was Mako Sundaram, and who was, according to his biological profile, a 26-year-old from a coastal region of their homeworld, put on what our translators later told us is called a game face. This is apparently a human expression for a specific arrangement of facial muscles designed to communicate absolute, serene, terrifying confidence. Then Mako Sundaram sprinted directly at the tidal wall, not around it, not at an angle to find a weak point, directly at it, at full speed, screaming, and I want to stress this, not in fear, in something our cultural analysts spent 2 weeks trying to classify before settling on the category of enthusiasm. He hit the tidal wall and the tidal wall broke. It broke because, and this is still the subject of ongoing academic debate, Mako Sundaram had apparently decided at some point in his preparation that the correct response to an armored wall of 8 warriors was to treat it like a problem that could be solved through the application of unreasonable personal momentum. He wedged himself into a joint between 2 Pelhari warriors, pushed with his legs, and 2 of the Pelhari, despite massing 3 times what he did, went sideways. The formation cracked, and the moment it cracked, the other 5 humans came through the gap like water through a broken dam. The entire arena was silent for a moment. Then the human team started cheering. For Mako. While the match was still happening, Chauvelin later told our debriefers, "I have faced opponents who were stronger. I have faced opponents who were faster. I have never faced opponents who were having this much fun." The Pelhari lost in 14 minutes. Not because the humans were stronger, because the data confirms they were not. Not because the humans were faster, because the Pelhari have them on raw speed by a measurable margin. The Pelhari lost because the humans treated the entire engagement as though it were personally enjoyable, and this, we would later learn, is arguably the most dangerous thing a human can do. See, every other species in the proving games approaches combat as a serious business. There are pre-match rituals. There is careful psychological preparation. There is, in many cultures, a period of meditation or centering. Combat is solemn, combat is weighty, combat matters, and you treat it accordingly. The humans treated it like a game, not because they were not taking it seriously. This is the part that took us the longest to understand. They were taking it completely seriously. They had studied the Pelhari. They knew the tidal wall formation. They had a counter-strategy. Tova Reyes had notes, actual physical notes written on dead plant matter in a substance made from pigment, that she had reviewed before the match. But humans, it turns out, are one of the only species in the known galaxy that is capable of taking something completely seriously and enjoying themselves enormously at the exact same time. For them, the two are not in conflict. For them, the two apparently enhance each other. When Vrith-san, our chief psychological analyst, reviewed the neural activity data from the human team during the match, she went very quiet for a very long time. Then she turned to me and said, "Vrith, their stress responses are triggering their reward systems." I said, "I'm sorry, what is triggering their what?" She said, "Fear, danger, pressure, these are things that make humans feel good." I took a moment to process that. "Vrith," I said carefully, "are you telling me that the humans brought a species to the proving games that enjoys being in danger?" "Enjoys is perhaps too mild a word," said Vrith-san. The correct term, based on their own literature, is thrives. The second match was against the Durvan. The Durvan are, and I say this with complete scientific objectivity, terrifying. They stand twice the height of an average human. They have natural body armor that has been tested against weapons in the grade 9 category. They have been undefeated in the proving games for over 200 years. Their team was led by Grand Combatant Krethona, who was considered by the Conclave's ranking system to be the single most dangerous individual in arena competition. Grand Combatant Krethona walked into the pre-match meeting, looked at Tova Reyes from his full and considerable height, and said, in the measured, deliberate tone of someone who wants to give their opponent a chance to reconsider all of their life's choices, "You should withdraw." Tova Reyes looked up at him. She tilted her head slightly to the left. Our observers noted that this is a human behavior associated with curiosity. She said, "Have you seen our match against the Pelhari?" Krethona said. "Yes," Tova said. "Okay, I'm just checking," and walked away to find something to eat. Krethona stood there for a moment longer than was comfortable for everyone watching. Our on-site representative, a junior analyst named Fine Door, later described the expression on Krethona's face as the look of a very large predator who has just realized for the first time in its life that something smaller than it is not afraid of it, and does not know how to process this information. The match against the Durvan lasted 22 minutes. The humans lost the first 8 of those minutes. They lost quite badly. 2 members of the human team were physically removed from the field by Durvan warriors and placed outside the boundary markers, which is the arena's equivalent of being defeated. The score at the 8-minute mark was 2-0 in favor of the Durvan. Grand combatant Crethona, with great professionalism, allowed himself one moment of visible satisfaction, and then Tova Reyes, from across the arena, looked at Crethona and smiled. Not a polite smile, not a diplomatic smile, the kind of smile that, as Findor put it in her report, communicated that she had been waiting for something and it had just arrived. She had been waiting for 2 of her people to be removed from the field, because that had been, as we later learned from reviewing her written notes, the exact trigger point for Phase 2 of her strategy. Phase 2 involved a human named Deshi Waller, who had spent the first 8 minutes of the match doing, by all appearances, absolutely nothing in the corner of the arena while everyone focused on the main engagement. Deshi Waller then proceeded to dismantle the Durvan formation from a direction that should not have been physically accessible, using methods that our analysts described in their official report as creative, alarming, and in one particularly memorable footnote, not covered by any existing rulebook section, which is technically not the same as being against the rules. The humans won in the final minute. Grand combatant Crethona stood in the center of the arena when it was over. He looked at Tova Reyes. He looked at Deshi Waller. He looked at Mako Sundaram, who was already making a joke about something. Then he said, to no one in particular, "What are these creatures?" It was a good question. It was, in fact, the question that the conclave would spend the next 3 years trying to answer. By the time the humans had won their 5th consecutive match, the conclave had convened 3 emergency sessions. By the 7th win, we had established a special research committee. By the 9th win, Grand Counselor Verith himself had requested a full brief, and when the brief was delivered, he sat in silence for 4 full minutes before saying, with the quiet horror of someone who has realized the universe is larger and stranger than they previously believed, "We gave them an arena, and they are using it to practice." He was right. That was the thing none of us had understood. Every other species in the proving games treats each match as its own event, with its own strategy and its own outcome. Win or lose, the match is the match. It begins, it ends, and then it is a record in the archives. The humans were treating each match as a learning opportunity. They were losing individual engagements on purpose to test opponent responses. They were letting Durvan warriors remove their teammates in the opening minutes not because they had to, but because they wanted to know how the Durvan would behave when they thought they were winning. They were feeding data into a strategy that was not just about this match or the next match, but about all of the matches across all of the opponents, building something that none of us had a name for yet. Vrith-san gave it a name. She called it adaptive escalation. The humans were not simply competing. They were evolving their approach in real time, using each encounter to become something slightly more dangerous than they had been before it. And they were, all the while, laughing. Grand Counselor Verith looked at me at the end of that briefing. He said, "Vreth Olen, do you understand what is happening?" I said, "I believe so, Counselor," he said. "Then explain it to me, plainly." I took a breath. I said, "We invited a species to participate in organized, regulated, rule-bound competition. And somewhere between the invitation and now, they decided to be very, very good at it. The problem is that very good at it for a human does not have a visible ceiling. Every time we think we are seeing the upper limit of what they are capable of, the limit moves." The counselor was quiet again for a moment. Then he said very softly, "Can they be stopped?" And that, dear reader, is where part 1 of my report ends, because the answer to that question takes considerably more pages, and considerably more horror, and at least one incident involving a human, a malfunctioning gravity generator, and a decision that our entire medical review board agreed was, quote, statistically impossible and also completely intentional. To understand what happened next, you need to understand one fundamental truth about the galactic conclave of 63 civilizations. We are, above all else, an organization built on the principle of order. Order is sacred to us. Order is the reason we exist. 63 species with 63 different biologies, 63 different languages, 63 different definitions of what constitutes a reasonable breakfast, all agreeing to function under a single shared framework of law and regulation. Order is what separates civilization from catastrophe. The humans, bless their absolutely unhinged little hearts, treated order the way Mako Sundaram treated the Pelhari tidal wall. They did not break it. They did not disrespect it. They simply found every single gap in it, squeezed through those gaps with a cheerfulness that bordered on offensive, and then looked back at you from the other side with an expression that said, "The rules never said we couldn't." They were right. Every single time. That was the problem. After the 9th consecutive human victory in the proving games, the Conclave's Special Research Committee on Human Combat Behavior, which I was now chairing because apparently I had written one too many memos about how worried I was and someone decided that meant I should be personally responsible for fixing it, convened a meeting with the human delegation. The human liaison to the conclave was a man named Piotr Gask. Piotr was, by human standards, older, gray at the temples as they call the sides of their heads. He wore what humans call a suit, which is a garment constructed from woven fabric and designed to communicate seriousness and professionalism. He sat across from me at the conference table, folded his hands, and waited. I said, "Mr. Gask, the conclave has some concerns about your team's performance in the proving games." Piotr Gask nodded slowly. "What kind of concerns?" "The winning kind," I said. "Specifically, the way your team is winning." Piotr looked at me with the patient expression of a man who has had this conversation before, or possibly the expression of a man who expected to have this conversation and has been quietly preparing for it. "Are we breaking any rules?" I looked at my notes. I looked at 17 volumes of Proving Games regulations. I looked at the 3 supplementary rule addenda that the conclave had hastily drafted after the match against the Durvan. "No," I said. "You are not breaking any rules." "Are we winning by more than the permitted margin?" "There is no rule about winning margins." "Are we using prohibited equipment?" "No." "Prohibited formations?" "No." "Prohibited tactics?" "We are working on a definition," I admitted. Piotr Gask smiled. It was a small smile, controlled, but it was there. "Then what specifically is the concern?" And here is where I made a mistake. Here is where I said the thing that I would spend the next several years wishing I had not said. Because in the interest of honest diplomacy, I told him the truth. "Mr. Gask," I said, "the concern is that your team is getting better. Not just winning, getting better. With each match, your team adapts, incorporates new information, develops new approaches, and returns to the next engagement as a measurably more capable unit than it was before. We have run projections." I slid a data tablet across the table. "By our estimates, at your current rate of improvement, your team will be capable of defeating any opponent in the proving games within approximately 11 more matches." Piotr looked at the data tablet. He picked it up. He studied it for a moment. Then he set it down and said, "Your projection is off." I said, "I beg your pardon," he said. "The 11-match estimate. It's off. Tova thinks 8. Probably 7 if the next opponent uses a standard defensive formation because we've been working on something specific for that." The room was silent. "You," I said slowly, "have been counting." "We are always counting," said Piotr Gask, with the calm certainty of someone stating a fact so obvious to him that he cannot quite understand why it needs to be stated. "That's what we do." I reported back to Grand Counselor Verith that evening. I told him everything Piotr Gask had said. Verith listened without interrupting, which was unusual because Verith interrupts everyone. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Vreth, how many species in the conclave have been in the proving games for more than 100 years?" I said, 41. "How many of those 41 species have a continuously improving performance record across the full span of their participation?" I thought about it. "None," I said. "Most species plateau. Some decline slightly as their tactical systems become predictable. And the humans have been participating for how long? 14 months. Varath put his face in his primary manipulators, which is the conclave equivalent of rubbing your eyes when you are very, very tired. "Vreth," he said, "we have a species that has been in the games for 14 months and is still on the upward slope of their improvement curve. What happens when they reach the top of that curve?" I said, "We don't know," he said. "No, we don't. And that is precisely what concerns me." The 10th match was against the Vorkai. The Vorkai, as I mentioned earlier, have not slept in 600,000 years. They are also, and this is relevant, the current holders of the Proving Games All-Species Championship, a title they have held for 90 years without interruption. They are not simply good at the games, they are the definition against which all other competitors are measured. Facing the Vorkai in the arena is the kind of thing that other species spend years preparing for. Most of them lose anyway. The Vorkai team captain was named Srel Van. Srel Van communicated exclusively through a combination of electromagnetic pulses and color-shifted bioluminescence, which our translators handled, but which always felt to me like receiving a message from something that existed on a slightly different plane of reality than the rest of us. Srel Van's message, transmitted before the match, was 3 pulses and a sustained gold-green luminescence that our translator rendered as, "We have reviewed your previous engagements. You are interesting. We will enjoy this." Tova Reyes, when this was relayed to her, said, "Tell them same." The match lasted 41 minutes. I will not attempt to describe all 41 minutes. because doing so would require a document longer than this report, and also because several segments of the footage have been classified by the Conclave's Security Division on grounds that the tactics displayed are, and I quote directly from the classification notice, sufficiently innovative that their widespread distribution represents a strategic concern for member civilizations. What I can tell you is this: in the first 10 minutes, the Vorkai did exactly what they always do, which is establish absolute positional dominance through a system of overlapping coverage zones that leaves no blind spots, no gaps, and no avenues of approach that are not covered by at least 2 Vorkai warriors at all times. They have been doing this for 90 years. It works against everyone. It worked against the humans too, for 10 minutes. In the 11th minute, Deshi Waller did something that I watched from the observation deck in real time and still required 47 replays to fully understand. He moved through a gap that did not exist. Not a gap in the Vorkai formation. A gap in the concept of where the gaps should be, created by the precise and apparently pre-calculated movement of 3 of his teammates in the previous 90 seconds, who had each made choices that looked, individually, like mistakes, and which turned out to be, collectively, the construction of an entirely new approach vector that the Vorkai's defensive system had no protocol for addressing. Srel Van, in the moment it happened, produced a bioluminescent pulse that our translator rendered as a single word. Oh, that was all. Just, oh, because there is a specific kind of surprise that comes not from something being bigger or faster or stronger than you expected, but from something being smarter than you expected in a way you did not anticipate being surprised by. The Vorkai had studied the humans, they had reviewed all 9 previous matches, they had built a model of human tactical behavior. The humans had apparently anticipated that the Vorkai would build a model, and they had spent 9 matches feeding that model subtly incorrect information. Let me repeat that because I want it to be absolutely clear. The human team had, across 9 separate matches against 9 separate opponents, been deliberately including small tactical quirks in their performance. Quirks that were real enough to look genuine but which were specifically designed to create a false picture of their actual capabilities, not for those 9 opponents, for the 10th one, for the Vorkai. When Vrithsan heard this analysis, she sat down very suddenly and said, "They were not competing in those 9 matches." "They were competing," I said. "No," she said. "They were doing something else. They were performing. They were constructing a narrative about what they were, so that when it mattered, the opponent would be responding to the narrative instead of the reality." I said, "In human literature, I believe there is a word for this." Vrithsan said, "There are several words. None of them are particularly comforting." The humans won in the 41st minute. Srel Van, at the end of the match, stood facing Tova Reyes for a long moment. Then Srel Van produced a color sequence our translator had some difficulty with, but eventually rendered as, "You planned this from the beginning, from before the first match." Tova Reyes said, "We planned for this from before the first match. There is a difference." Srel Van processed this. Then, "You did not know you would face us." "No," said Tova, "but we knew we might, so we prepared as though we would." The bioluminescence Srel Van produced next was something our translator had never encountered before. After 3 days of analysis, it was classified as an expression with no direct equivalent in any language in the Conclave's database. The closest approximation our team could produce was, "I am experiencing respect and discomfort simultaneously, and I am unsatisfied with both." The emergency session of the Conclave Council was called the following morning. Grand Councillor Verith opened it by saying, "We need to talk about the humans." Councillor Drevna Al, who had originally proposed including the humans in the games, and who had been sitting at the back of every council meeting for the last 11 months with the expression of someone watching a fire they accidentally started, said, "Are we going to ban them?" Verith said, "We are going to discuss options." The options were discussed, at length, for 6 hours. Option 1, ban the humans from the proving games entirely. This was immediately complicated by the fact that the humans had not broken any rules, which meant banning them would require either changing the rules specifically to exclude them, which raised complicated questions about equal treatment of member civilizations, or inventing a new category of disqualification which would need to be defined, and defining it would require specifying exactly what the humans were doing that warranted disqualification, and specifying that would essentially mean writing a document that said, "You are too good at this and we find it alarming." Option 2, change the rules of the proving games to limit the kind of adaptive strategy the humans were using. This was attempted. The rule drafting committee spent 4 weeks on it. They produced a draft that Piotr Gask reviewed, marked with small notations in the margins, and returned with a polite note that said the draft contained 17 internal contradictions and inadvertently banned a formation that the Vorkai had been using successfully for 60 years. He offered to help revise it, which was somehow more unsettling than if he had objected. Option 3. Allow the humans to continue competing and simply accept the consequences. It was during the discussion of Option 3 that Councillor Brevthan of the Skeld delegation said something that stopped the room completely. He said, "Has anyone actually asked the humans what they want?" Silence. Full, complete, embarrassing silence. Because no. In 11 months of study and 3 emergency sessions and 17 supplementary rule addenda, we had been so busy analyzing the humans and debating the humans and being alarmed by the humans that nobody had sat down with Tova Reyes or Piotr Gask or Mako Sundaram and asked the simple question, "What is it that you are trying to accomplish?" That task naturally fell to me. I met Tova Reyes in one of the conclave's visitor lounges the next afternoon. She was eating something she had brought from the human food preparation area, which smelled unusual in a way I had come to associate with humans generally. She offered me some. I declined politely. She shrugged, which is a human gesture of acceptance, and waited. I said, "Captain Reyes, the conclave would like to understand your goals in the proving games," she said. "To win." I said, "Yes, but beyond winning. What are you hoping to achieve?" She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Do you know what the humans thought when we were first invited to join the conclave?" I said, "I imagine you were honored." "We were terrified," she said. "We are one species, on one planet, in one small system." We looked at the conclave and we saw 62 other civilizations, most of them older than us, most of them with technology we were still centuries from developing, most of them bigger, most of them stronger, most of them with resources we could not begin to imagine. And we thought, what do we have, what do we bring to this? Why would 62 other civilizations ever take us seriously? She took a bite of her food, chewed, continued, "And then someone suggested the games," she said. "And we thought, well, that we can do." I said, "You entered the proving games to prove yourselves." "We entered the proving games," she said, "because it was the one arena where the size of your fleet doesn't matter. The age of your civilization doesn't matter. Your resources don't matter. The only thing that matters is what you do with what you have in the time you have to do it. And that," she said with a small, quiet smile, "is a game humans know how to play." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "Captain Reyes, the conclave is considering restricting your participation in the games," she said. "I know." "You know?" "Piotr told me. He's very good at reading council meeting summaries." She finished her food, set down the container, looked at me directly. "Can I tell you something honestly?" I said yes. She said, "Every species that has ever tried to stop a human from doing something by telling them it can't be done has made the same mistake. They think the words 'you can't' are a wall. For us, they're a door." I reported this back to Vereth, word for word. Vereth was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "Vereth, write the official conclave recommendation." I said, "What should it say?" He said, "It should say that the humans are to be removed from standard proving games competition, effective immediately, not as punishment, not as restriction. Reclassify them, give them a new category, something that reflects what they actually are." I said, "What category would that be?" Vereth said, "I don't know yet, but I know it cannot be the same category as everyone else, because everyone else is competing against each other, and the humans," he paused, "are competing against the concept of limits itself." The official conclave ruling was issued 4 days later. The humans were formally reclassified. Their proving games record was preserved. Their membership status was not affected, but they were moved, officially, permanently, into a category that had been created specifically for them and that has never been used for any other species in the history of the conclave. The category is called, in the formal conclave registry, Class Unranked, Asymmetric Development. What it means in plain language is this: we do not have a ranking system that can contain you because you are not done yet, and we cannot rank something that is still becoming. Tova Reyes, when the ruling was delivered, read it twice. Then she turned to Mako Sundaram and said something in their language that our translator caught as, "They banned us because we were too good." Mako said, "Is that good or bad?" Tova said, "Mako, in the entire history of the Galactic Conclave, no species has ever been removed from competition because they were a threat to the concept of the competition itself. So yeah, I think that's good." Mako thought about it. Then he said, "Do we still get to practice?" And Tova Reyes, captain of the human proving games team, representative of the single most unsettling species the conclave of 63 civilizations had ever encountered, smiled the smile of someone for whom a closed door is simply the beginning of an interesting problem. She said, "We are always practicing. My name is Vreth Olin. I have spent my career documenting conflicts and competitions across 6 decades and 63 civilizations. I have seen things that should not be possible. I have revised my understanding of the universe more times than I can comfortably count. But in all of that time, in all of those reports, I have only ever written one sentence that I knew, with complete certainty, would still be true 1,000 years from now. The sentence is this: the humans are not competing against you. They are competing against whoever they will be tomorrow. And tomorrow, they will be better. That is why they were banned. That is why we were afraid. That is why, if you are reading this report as a newly admitted species to the conclave, and you see the humans smile at you from across a conference table, you should smile back, be very polite, and immediately go check every single one of your assumptions, because somewhere in that smile is the quiet, patient, deeply enthusiastic certainty that they have already thought of something you have not. They usually have. Filed by Vreth Olin, Senior Conflict Analyst, Galactic Conclave of 63 Civilizations. Classification: recommended reading for all new conclave members. Addendum from Grand Counselor Vareth. This report is mandatory reading. That is not a suggestion,